Thank you all for coming to April's deep dive. We're going to be talking about space weather and electricity, and what happens to the grid when space weathery things happen. I am going to introduce our guest and then we'll get started. Our first speaker is Reed Wilcott. Wolcott, I'm sorry, I screwed that up. His title is Warning Coordination Meteorologist. I think is a fascinating title. Reed, I'm just going to let you take it away.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me today. Let me get my screen share and go here. All right, so first and foremost, I am not a space weather expert, but space weather is a part of the National Weather Service, and I do work for the National Weather Service here in Seattle. So I may or may not be able to answer any questions as they come up, but I will do my best. And if I need to go back and get some information, I am more than happy to do so. So we're really going to set the stage here of why we even care about space weather and what sort of impacts it can have. So space weather is interaction between energy emitted by the sun and its effect on our Earth. That might be the magnetosphere, it could be radiation getting down into people and electrical circuits and things of that nature. There's a lot of different moving parts here, but it's essentially the interaction between weather, quote unquote, weather coming from the sun and its effect on our Earth. Sorry, it's going really slow here. So the sun follows an 11-year cycle. It correlates very well with sunspot activity, and every 11 years or so we have a maximum in solar sunspot activity, which also correlates to a maximum in solar storm activity as well. The next maximum is expected to happen sometime between November of 24 and March of 26. That said, the current cycle that's on its upward swing is already well ahead of its predicted values. And so space weather experts at this point are unclear as to whether we're seeing an early peak for this cycle or if it's going to, if it's going to outdo, if it's going to continue to rise up until that peak between 24 and 26. That is still, remains to be seen. But we are expecting more solar activity. I don't know if anybody's been paying attention this last week, but we have had pretty significant solar activity over the last week or so. And we'll talk a little bit more about what kind of impacts we saw from that. So there are three primary hazards associated with solar events. The first is solar flares, which leads to radio blackouts. So when we have a solar flare, it's a sudden eruption of electromagnetic energy. It travels at the speed of light, so it arrives at the Earth in about 8 minutes. So in the case of a solar flare, there is essentially no warning, right? We're seeing it as it's happening. There's no way to get any warning for a solar flare radio blackout sort of situation. X-ray and extreme ultraviolet radiation ionizes the ionosphere on the sunlit side of Earth in these cases. And the main effects here are effects on HF radio communications, mainly between 3 and 30 megahertz. Depending on the severity of the event, it's either slightly or moderately degraded, or it could be completely impossible. It just could wipe out that entire band. The next set of hazards are solar radiation storms. So this is when we have large-scale magnetic eruption, often associated with the coronal mass ejection. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, and a solar flare. In these situations, we have protons that travel at a large fraction of the speed of light. So it's not quite at the speed of light, and these events arrives in tens of minutes or less. So we're talking within an hour again. So very little warning ahead of these solar radiation storms. These storms are associated with protons that penetrate the magnetosphere. They're guided down the magnetic field lines into the atmosphere, especially near the polar regions, and they can have effect on spacecraft, high altitude aircraft, including humans that might be in those areas, as well as electronic circuits. These events can also bring impacts to HF radio communications. That's supposed to be HF, not HR, radio communications. And the last one, and the one that people are probably the most familiar with, are geomagnetic storms. So this is what is associated with a coronal mass ejection, or CME. And this is a large eruption of plasma and magnetic field from the sun's corona. These travel much more slowly. They can arrive in as little as 15 to 18 hours, but usually it's a couple of days. It ranges there between a day and a half to 4 days usually is the time frame for these geomagnetic storms. These are it's essentially like a big gust of wind, but it's full of plasma and magnetic field, so it can create drag on satellites in low Earth orbit. It can create variations in the ionosphere the ionospheric density that modify the path of radio signals. So your radio signals aren't going where you want them to go. It can create errors in GPS locations, especially for high precision GPS. And it can also induce electrical currents in power grids and on pipelines as well. So these are the real kind of big bad ones. The other ones are slightly more temporary in nature, whereas geomagnetic storms can actually last for quite a long period of time. So some events, just to set a historical context here, some of you may be familiar with the March 1989 Quebec, Canada incident. The solar flare in this instance in coronal mass ejection occurred on March 10th. At the onset, it was solar flare, so there was radio jammed across much of the northern North America. Sorry. By March 12th, the coronal mass ejection reached our area, and we had northern lights visible down to Florida and Cuba. So quite a display of aurora with this event. And then on March 13th, shortly there was another peak, and within 2 minutes of that peak, all of Quebec's power grid lost connection, and an estimated 6 million customers lost power for 9 to 12 hours. And satellites tumbled out of control for a period of time. The largest event in recorded history that we're aware of occurred in September of 1859, called the Carrington event. Aurora in this case was visible down to Hawaii and south central Mexico. It was so bright that there were miners in the Rockies that woke up thinking it was daylight outside and started getting ready for the day. It induced sparks on telegraph lines, and telegraph operators were actually able to communicate even though they were disconnected from their power sources. So it induced enough current in order for telegraph operators to continue that connection. Then in more recent history, if you just Google solar events, you'll find different examples of effects. So back in 2022, after Hurricane Ian, major solar flare was disrupting communications for emergency responders in that case, so they weren't able to rely on their typically very reliable radio networks. It's another example here from Australia and New Zealand, showing that this can really affect anywhere in the world. And then I don't know if anybody else saw this event, but back in January of 22, SpaceX, the day after launch, lost 40 satellites, or I think it was like 38 satellites, Starlink satellites, due to one of these coronal mass ejections. And this was actually visible here in Western Washington. I attempted to take pictures of it out my bedroom window here, and I could see this line of satellites that weren't where they were supposed to be. And shortly after I saw them, they burned up, I think on the East Coast somewhere. So several different examples of events that can have impact on our infrastructure. So the way that we measure these events are on the NOAA space weather scales. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time going over these. These are all available. There's links at the end of this presentation that you can go and look at these. But I did want to point out that there are scales for radio blackouts, solar radiation storms, and geomagnetic storms. So in a worst case scenario event for radio blackout, it would be complete HF radio blackout in the entire sunlit side of Earth, lasting for several hours. And then, for navigation, low frequency navigation signals used by maritime and general aviation systems experience outages on the sunlit side of Earth. So again, mainly impacts on the sunlit side of Earth with these radio blackouts. For solar radiation storms, again, these are the ones that primarily impact our polar regions and arrive in tens of minutes or less. So in the case of an S5 or the highest level event, unavoidable high radiation hazard to astronauts doing EVAs, passengers and crew on high flying aircraft at high latitudes. It can impact the satellite operations and then other systems. Again, we talked about HF radio previously. And then the last one here, geomagnetic storm. So G5, the top end of the scale, again, this is where we would expect widespread voltage control problems. Grids can collapse at this point when we get to these G5 level events. Extreme surface charging on spacecraft, difficult communication with spacecraft, pipelines currents can reach hundreds of amps, HF radio gone, all of that kind of stuff. And one thing I want to note here is that last week, and I don't remember the date, I think it was over the weekend, I don't even remember, I was working a shift and we had a G4 storm just the other day. And it hit the G4 level several times over the period of about 12 to 24 hours or so. So again, we are on an uptick in activity here, and we've seen a few G2 and G3 storms so far this year, but we did just receive our first G4 storm that I'm aware of anyway, and in quite a few, a number of years now. So what do we do at the National Weather Service in Seattle? So the Space Weather Prediction Center is the agency that's charged with sending out alerts and warnings for these. So they send out alerts, warnings, watches, all sorts of stuff that you can subscribe to, and there'll be a link to that in these presentations as well. But when it comes to the local activity that we do at the National Weather Service office here in Seattle, when we have a level 3 or level 4 event, regardless of whether it's a solar flare or a solar radiation storm or a geomagnetic storm, we'll start to send information out on social media, and especially because so many people want to go out and see the aurora. But when we get to the level 5 events, this is where we'll start to send out actual statements. If there's time, we will also send out a weather briefing kind of detailing the expectations of the event to our emergency management partners across the region. And typically we'll also put up a web headline on our website as well. And then again, especially for R5 and S5, so those radio blackouts and the solar radiation storms, because of how quickly they actually arrive here, the event may be underway before we could actually take these actions that are listed here. In theory, we will take a lot more action for the G5, the geomagnetic storms, since they take quite a bit longer to arrive at our doorstep. And so this is the last slide here. This is resources for the Space Weather Prediction Center. You can subscribe for alerts from SWPC, which is the Space Weather Prediction Center, and learn more about the space weather scales. They've got a ton of information on their website. So with that, I think I will turn it back over to you, Anne.
Okay, great. Thanks, Reed. That was super quick. When you talk about HF frequencies, can I assume that that's ham radio frequencies?
It's really anything between 3 and 30 megahertz. So any operations that are going on in that band, regardless of whether it's ham radio or otherwise, it would be affected by solar radiation, all of these types of storms.
Okay, thanks. Reed, if you can stop sharing your screen, and then we'll just open it up to questions. That was super fast. I should have introduced this a little bit differently. The reason we wanted Reed here was he gave us a longer, one of his colleagues gave us a really detailed presentation on space weather. And Cindy and I happened to be there, and maybe a couple other folks that are on the call tonight. And we were struck by how this is, we're kind of we think we're on an upcycle. Didn't realize this happened, didn't realize it happened regularly. Certainly didn't realize we were potentially going into a more active season with space weather. And the fact that it impacts our ability to A, communicate, and B, use ham radio, which we all think is indestructible and the greatest thing ever. So really kind of hit us hard as like, this is something we ought to pay attention to as hub captains. Our drill coming up on June 11th is going to be a power outage. We had considered using space weather, geomagnetic storm, full halo coronal mass ejection event, whatever, considered using that as our backdrop for this massive power outage, but figured it'd be a little too hard to communicate to the public. But we did want the hub captains to understand how power outages can come from different sources. And this is Reed's just talking about one of the sources, which is completely out of our control and hurling at us from the sun. So any questions from the group?
Pat has her hand up. Oh, did.
Oh, Hugh, I could see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Reed, you mentioned it just a few days ago. That was a G4 event. Do you recall which day? It's just I'm curious for personal.
Yeah, I can get it for you just a minute here.
Was your hair standing on end, Hugh? Is that what you were experiencing?
So
No.
it was the afternoon of April 23rd, which was Sunday.
Yeah.
And it lasted through well into Sunday night into early Monday at least.
What sort of effects were you seeing? I mean, radio wise, or were you doing anything with radio?
So, well, we didn't firsthand see any impacts with radio, but we did see some reports on Twitter that there were impacts in some areas with HF radio from amateur radio operators across the country. So that was definitely something that was going on. I didn't see anything that was from local impacts, but it certainly was in other parts of the country.
All right. No, we were sailing up in the San Juans and wondering why there was so much damn static on the marine band, and we couldn't understand several communications. You know, Coast Guard would come out and say, listen to such and such a channel for a message, you know, which are usually important, and we couldn't make it out. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Hugh, are you pretty sure that's what it was?
Yeah, radio was working fine the following day coming back down to Port Townsend. So yeah.
Was that on the VHF AM band?
Yeah, marine band. Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions?
I have a question, Ann Bond here.
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Can you tell me then, when you have an event like this, is it typical that the event causes an interruption but no actual damage to the performance of radios after the event has passed?
So certainly up to G4, I'm not aware of anything that would actually do much in the way of damage. With G5, since it can induce a lot of electrical currents and things, then at G5 level, I would be concerned about permanent damage to electronics that are plugged into power systems, or surges, all that sort of stuff. But it's really only at that G5 level.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And so, Reed, how would we get information from official sources telling us what to do, like unplug our devices?
Well, that's one thing that is missing right now. There's not a lot of connecting, what we have as far as forecast information to mitigation strategies on the ground, which is why I've been really happy that Seattle OEM has started to take this seriously and had the presentation at the DMC meeting. And I think they're going to do some sort of exercise. They're starting to think about this more. Because like I said, we at the local office will put out messaging when we get to that G5 level. But after, what happens after that is really in the hands of the decision makers, right? We can say, it'd probably be a good idea to unplug things, but that's even beyond the scope of my, knowledge, really.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
I was going to comment that for the G5 like level of event, even if you unplug things from some historical notes from the power from the telegraph lines, for example, in the 1800s, the geomagnetic storm is inducing electrical power into the circuits. So
Yes.
even if you unplug stuff, power could still be induced into your electrical devices such that it could damage them. So even unplugging it's a step in the right direction. It may or may not be total protection from a really, really, really bad event. And that's where some of the tin hat people come in and put everything in a metal box and, you know, double ground it and on and on and on. I guess there's no limit to the protection you could try to take. On the other hand, there's, like any emergency preparedness, there's reasonable levels of precaution and preparedness that most people could and should take, and there's going beyond that to extremes. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks, Carl.
that's a really good point. So one of the challenges we have with like a G5 level event is it hasn't really happened in modern history. And so it's unprecedented, right? We don't know the total scope of the potential impacts. If you think back to the June 2021 heat event, it was the same sort of situation. We were messaging that we flat out don't know the complete scope of the potential impact from that heat dome event. And we were surprised by a lot of things that happened there. This would be much worse, right? You're talking about widespread, potentially long-term power outages, damage to equipment, all sorts of stuff that would render a lot of what we typically use every day completely useless for long periods of time. So this is a much, much bigger event. And this, again, this has the potential to compound impacts from other disasters. If you had hurricanes or a heat dome or whatever going on somewhere else, if you had those two things happening at the same time, you really have to think about that.
Thanks, Reed. Matt, you had your hand up. This probably needs to be the last question.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, partially a question, but just wanted to sort of clarify when we're talking about the damage. I just wanted to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So electronics being damaged, that's largely coming from the electrical grid, because that's where we have these very long wires that act as antennas for the electromagnetic fields. So, I would expect things that are connected to the grid to be damaged first, but there are cases where people have large antennas connected to systems that could cause damage in those G4 or G5 class, probably. But I'm curious if there are any guidelines on that as far as the relationship between the field strength and the length of the conductor that we could use.
That is one I don't know, and I don't know if there's research on that, to be honest.
Okay.
Good question, Matt. Okay, Reed, thank you very much. We appreciate your time, and thank you for making this so accessible. You did a really good job of taking quite complicated concepts and making it a lot more understandable than I was. Yeah, thank you for that. Reed, you're welcome to hang out if you'd like, but we are going to turn it over to Brittany Barnwell, who's our next guest speaker. She is the Emergency Manager, Workplace Logistics for Seattle City Light. So Brittany's here to talk about kind of what can we expect from a long-term power outage.
So,
Go ahead, Brittany.
Oh, thank you. So good evening, everyone. And I was hoping, since Reed led with all that great information, I know people have preparedness questions and every other thing to go with that. But I know we spoke earlier, and I know some of the questions that were on the sheet that you gave me, I would feel more comfortable with my counterparts from the other city departments answering those transportation questions and everything else. But I can speak on a long-term power outage and what it takes to be prepared, at least for our customers and our citizens within Seattle. As everyone may know, right now there is a supply chain shortage, and that goes for transformers, that goes for all the materials that we need to make sure our customers have power. Just to give a little background, Seattle City Light operates off of 26 kV, which is a little antiquated, but I do want to let you know that there are only 2 or 3 other utilities who operate off of the same kV as we do. So if we were to have a large power outage to this magnitude, to the G5 magnitude, it could honestly be weeks without power. And that's only because of the supply chain shortage. And then also too, being able to get our mutual aid folks to come over and help us, but also to making sure we have the equipment for them to go out and help, put up everything all over. With that being said, one thing that we do like to do within IMT, we have our PIOs who send out information, who blast information on all of the social media sites and everywhere throughout Seattle. But also too, if this was to happen, we would be connecting with the Office of Emergency Management. As everyone knows, OEM is the hub for emergency management within the city of Seattle. And we have the various departments that come together to make that structure work. And we do it in an EOC fashion, which is the Emergency Operations Center. And those that come to the Emergency Operations Center, we are emergency support functions for each of the departments. With that being said, if we were to have a huge event like this, we would definitely be in contact with Ann for sure, and also Cindy. I know Ann and Cindy has been coming to our DMC meetings and getting to know the folks. So I think my thing would be now is, how do we connect these dots, and how do we fill in these gaps to make sure that our citizens are better prepared for what's coming? And as Reed mentioned, because of this, the G5, is very unpredictable, and we're very uncertain on the impacts that it could have to our customers. So being prepared, honestly, is the number one thing, and being able to be prepared for weeks without power is what I suggest and what I push for. Honestly, having a generator on site, if you could have a generator, having bottles of water, having, radios will be out, but at least you should have some type of radio. A lot of the radios now are going without batteries. So it could be possible to go out and seek a solution where you don't have to use any batteries within your radio to get communication. I've seen that being done on the East Coast for sure. And that's one thing that, that we could potentially look at, maybe potentially putting together a list, or me getting with the other various departments to put together a list to give out to the hub captains. So if this was to happen, you all could give these lists to everybody that you all serve. And honestly, just making sure that you pay attention to your local news, like Reed said, making sure you pay attention to your city leaders and everything like that. But for this G5, it would be so uncertain, what could happen. And then too, with the liability issues with electronics going out and things in homes that are going out. City Light, we can't come into homes and fix those type of things. So just making sure that you all have someone in line that you can call on who could come if you need to respond to those events. I'm here to help if I can pinpoint that person, but being prepared for at least 3 weeks to a month without power is what I really, really suggest. And as the emergency manager for Seattle City Light, I can only do so much because I am a city department, but it is my duty to make sure if we do activate and if this does happen, to send out that information, to blast everybody on what to do to stay safe and so no one can get hurt. Not sure if the G5 is predictable like a hurricane. Of course, we can see hurricanes coming from way out in the Atlantic Ocean, but the G5, I'm not 100% sure if you can track that or if you can kind of pinpoint when that will actually happen. So like Reed mentioned, the communication on that within the city, we haven't, really spoke about that except at the DMC. So this is something new that we're bringing into the wheelhouse, that we're learning about, that we're trying to figure out. But also too, as Reed mentioned, not 100% sure if there are any case studies out there. But because
Brittany?
I'm sorry.
Let me pause you for just a second. We've got a couple questions.
I've seen the hands going up.
Yeah.
I've seen them.
Cindy, can you ask your question, please?
Will you be able to help us do what you can do before the event and what you can do after the event? Because I heard you say, well, afterwards people can go order through the supply chain. I'm like, nope, no internet. So we have to, be ready to deal with the here we are, now what situation. So we want to work on both flip coins.
No, yeah, definitely. And the radios now, I say like the pre-planning, just to answer your question, like this is the time to pre-plan. This is the time, like, I'm happy you brought me here. This is the time where I can pull people in from the Seattle City Light organizations to see what knowledge they may have on making sure that we're prepared. for this, but also too being able to be sustainable after this happens. So, this will be a long road ahead, but I think it's very important. But I also too think says that this brings awareness to the community and to everyone. So I feel like OEM would definitely be on board, but you would have a more collaborative effort, because not only will we have blackouts and things with with the G5, but then you bring in that transportation piece. All of the lights will be out at this point. You will have no public transportation for your electric buses. You will have no public transportation for your light rail. So all of these things bring in different components of emergency preparedness from these other departments that it'll be great to loop them in, so we can talk about the different things that you all will need from our different perspectives to be okay before and after the event.
Excellent. Thanks, Brittany. Dave, you want to ask your question?
Thank you, and thank you, Brittany. I have a comment and then a question. My comment is that at Seattle ACS, we obsess about electric power and batteries, and one of the I'll call shortcuts or steps that you can take is your automobile can provide enough current to charge devices and maybe even some critical appliances. Obviously, with no power out, if somebody needs a respirator or something like that, an automobile with some minor accessories might be able to provide the power necessary, as long as people have tanks of gas. My question is, will we have water in Seattle if we lose power under this circumstance? Thank you.
To answer your question, no, you will not, because we need SPU needs their pumps in order, they need their pumps to have electricity in order to work. So no, unfortunately, we will not have water. But then too, like I mentioned earlier, this is when we bring SPU in, our other counterparts, to talk about what are their long-term goals for a power outage and us not having any water. And I'm sure, 100% sure, Chad and his group has a plan to make sure that that the citizens of Seattle has water, while we try to figure out how to get the power back on safely and efficiently to our customers. So this is like a all hands on deck emergency management response at this point, because it's going to be a trickle effect once all the lights are out.
Excellent.
Seattle
Thanks, Brittany.
City Light that we still have to have a strategic plan in putting those in, getting the lights on.
Okay. Brittany, your audio is going out in and out for just a second there. Real quick before I get to Carl's question, I reached out to Chad. We're talking, I think it's on Monday. I'm going to ask him all the questions that I think that we would all have about, is everybody without water, or does gravity help anybody get water in this kind of thing? Same questions with sewers. So all those questions I'm going to try and ask Chad, really specific questions, and then I'll report back to the group on what he has to say. But I'm glad Brittany was able to at least address that piece of it, the water piece. Carl, you had your hand up.
Well, I think Phil's raising his before I put mine up. You want to go first?
Phil, do you want to? You're muted.
Thank you. Brittany, gas stations without electricity are not going to be able to operate either. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. Can you hear me? Am I clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes,
Okay.
that is absolutely correct. Yes. And that
I don't know if we can
well,
siphon out of a gas tank in the ground. I don't
no,
know that we have a tube.
and that'll mean as well for all of the city departments. If we can't pump fuel from our stations, we have to get mutual aid to, get more gas and get more fuel in. I mean, and if we have a GL5, yeah, to keep everything running. And not sure how far a G5 will spread, but what if it hits Idaho? What if it hits Oregon? Then our counter states, they're going to need assistance with us as well. So this could be broader than just Washington State if we really have something this big. So that's why I don't want folks to expect a quick turnaround, because this is going to be a long-term recovery effort.
Full
So,
of good news everywhere, aren't you?
so what I was gonna say, and Ann also does this, I'm one of the outreach presenters for the Office of Emergency Management, doing
Mhm.
disaster preparedness presentations and SNAP presentations and things like that. I'm
Mhm.
on the disaster management committee, although I rarely attend meetings. Some of the points that we like to make and some of the comments that have been brought up here remind me of those. Phil's question about gas stations. Well, if we lose power, not only are gas stations not going to be working, but plastic money isn't going to be working.
Nothing.
ATM machines aren't going to be working. I mean, you're going to need cash if you're going to buy anything, period. That's one example. You know, we talk about preparedness, communications preparedness. I can't say whether or not ham radio is going to work or GMRS radio. We won't know until the time comes. But I would not expect cell phones to be working very reliably. Cell towers, all of them have batteries that can run 3 to 12 hours. Some of them, a minority, have generators. And as you note, if you can't pump fuel anyplace, it's going to be very hard to refill generators. Or buy gas to refill your own generator. So part of your disaster planning, and I'm just going to make a quick summary of my thoughts. Part of your disaster planning needs to be, what if I don't have power and I can't buy gas for my generator and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Make a list of what ifs, build your plan around that. Dave is in this session. One of his favorite comments is no plan survives first contact with the enemy. But if you've got a plan, you have a starting point. And from there, you can adjust and build as necessary. Thank you.
No, you're
Thanks, Paul.
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And making sure when those plans are put together that you test them and you run them. And sometimes you may write a plan and the plan doesn't work out, but at least you have a starting point and you have a shell where you can recreate, redocument, do your after action and change and move forward. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave. You've got a question?
Yeah, well, just a comment as I investigated the Hurricane Maria consequences in Brittany. I'm sure that you studied that, where they were without power for weeks and months and had to adjust. The first thing that perhaps the local hubs want to concern themselves with is to identify vulnerable individuals whose lives would be in danger without that electricity. Perhaps they have an appliance that requires electricity, and unless that thing operates, they will die. And the other thing is people who need insulin. Insulin has to be refrigerated, and without that refrigeration, the insulin will go bad, and they will suffer. In Puerto Rico, they just quite simply evacuated people and lodged them in hotels on the mainland and left them without much else. So that may be something else. But one of the things the hubs may want to do is to identify those vulnerable persons and help communicate what services can be supplied to them.
No, you're absolutely right. And I want everyone to know too, if this event was to get big enough to where it would become a declaration for the state of Washington, the federal government may relocate you. They did this when in Louisiana, when they had the huge hurricane down there. They relocated folks to Atlanta and to Washington, D.C. So depending on the length and the extent of the outage, the federal government may have to come in because it may be too much for the locals. So we have to think about how will we evacuate all of the people in Washington state. And then we have to think about if it doesn't just hit Washington state and it hits Oregon and Idaho. So just having that thought to where you won't be able to have any cash, just like, you won't be able to go to the ATM, won't be able to get gas, won't be able to use the public service. You really have to think about being able to maintain for at least a month. And that is really getting into the weeds of what everyone has going on at home and starting up a plan at your home. I see, Phil, is that your hand up? I see your
Yes,
physical hand. Yeah.
Okay. Brittany, when you say you bring in help or infrastructure or whatever from outside, assuming that it's only going to be in the Seattle area, what actually do they bring in to help?
Depending on what we need, depending on what's damaged from the G5. The G5 may cause transformers to pop. The G5, it's different scenarios that we really don't know what could, really happen. But if it comes to materials such as transformers, conduit, feeders, anything that we need to restore power, it's only us and 3 other utilities on the East Coast who function off the 26 kV. Tacoma Power doesn't operate off of it. Puget Sound doesn't operate off of it. So we're really, City Light has an antiquated system, but we're doing forward thinking to trying to change that. But I just want to give everyone a heads up, which I'm pretty sure nobody, knew, that, we only have 3 other utilities who function off the same KV as us. So our supply chain shortage is real. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. I see the sheet.
Yes.
I see the screen being shared. Okay. So yeah, so the supply chain shortage is definitely real. And, I don't want to give anybody false hopes, because right now during a regular storm, yes, we have wind. Your lights may come back on in 5 or 6 hours, but this is something that is definitely beyond the locals' control. But we will definitely try to act and respond as efficiently and as quickly as we can to get our customers power.
Brittany, this is Ann. I'm the one that shared this picture. Is this, when you talk about this 26 kV, which I'm assuming it's a unique system,
It's the
does
distribution.
that have any? Okay, does that have anything to do with this diagram? Oops, sorry.
No.
No.
Oh, okay,
No,
sorry,
no.
I'm confusing things.
No, you're fine. No,
All
you're
right.
fine. Good question. No. Frank, I think I see
That's
your
about
hand
transmission.
up.
The 26 kV is what we have on the street at the transformer to your house.
Okay. Frank, did you have a question?
Yeah, could someone on screen speak to how hospitals will respond to this for a month or longer, given their massive need for electricity? They have generators, et cetera, but I hear the word evacuation. Could it come to a point where actually to take care of people in hospital in this zone, they have to be evacuated out of the area?
Yes, it would have to come to that. And I mean, and that's all citizens. And I know we have multiple hospitals within the city. So yes, that would include them as well.
And my guess is that it's the most vulnerable, the folks that are currently hospitalized. Those are the folks that are getting evacuated. Somebody like me, yeah, unless I'm hurt, I'm not going anywhere. I'm low priority.
The Northwest Healthcare Coalition, that's their charter, is to assess the hospitals and do the movement of patients or whatever, and also plug into the city's fuel plan, because how will fuel get to the generators? So yeah, there's a big network of planning around the hospitals, but not out in the neighborhoods.
Yeah. Okay, Carl, and then Phil.
In higher level ICS courses, ICS 300 and 400, for River City takes the brunt of all evil. Those exercises help you think about how would you address a mass problem situation. And you start talking about generators and fuel. And if there's road damage, how do you prioritize the use of fuel? And there's not an easy answer to that. And there's no single train of thought that's going to lead you to a simple answer to that. And that's kind of what the Emergency Operations Center and all the representatives from the city departments, they're going to sit down and they're going to look at all of the information available and make the best decision possible, given that information on how to use very limited resources. And I promise you, not everybody's going to be happy with any decision that's made.
Yeah. Thanks, Carl. Phil? And then Pat.
How do you get out of this antiquated situation? Is it federal funding? Is it, what's going on to get us out of the antiquated situation we're in?
I'm not sure that's a question we need to address here. We're not going to solve that as hub captains. Do you have a short answer, Brittany?
Yeah, I can definitely, from my point of view, from the emergency management point of view, getting federal grant dollars. I've been working on that. We just received a $1.1 million grant that I was happy to say that I was a part of myself and the climate adaptation advisor to relocate the transmission towers that were in the Oso landslide that happened back in 2014 that you all may know about. So right now we're currently resubmitting a grant. FEMA gave City Light the thumbs up to submit it, but we're trying to figure out how to harden our infrastructure. So I can tell you from my end, that's some forward thinking that I'm doing to try to build some better resiliency. But it's not really one answer. It's multiple pieces, but that's my emergency management piece, bringing FEMA in, getting federal dollars to try to help fix some of these issues because it's there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thanks, Brittany. Pat, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I understand there are households that are fortunate and have generators. They will operate as long as they have fuel to operate them, which maybe is something that at a hub level we could share a little bit. Those that have gas and generators, and then you get your refrigeration. But there's a lot of solar panels out there too, but all that electricity goes back to Seattle City Light. So I'm not sure where, batteries come in and how costly that is to have a battery set up on your solar panels and what's involved with that.
Yeah, that would be
Brittany?
the engineering team. That would be the engineering team. I'm strictly in preparedness, trying to bring everybody together. But I mean, for those type of questions, I would love to bring in the engineering and the energy innovation team that we have. So we have whole separate teams that focus on that specific piece alone. So if y'all would like, I can gather those people and bring them there for the more technical questions around the solar panels and how to connect those dots.
Yeah. And Brittany and I have been talking. I have solar panels on my house, and we
Yep.
opted not to get a Tesla wall, not the bank of batteries kind of thing, which makes my solar panels useless in a disaster. So Brittany and I have been talking about getting her engineers around the table and seeing if there's some kind of fix. You have to be super careful because
Yes.
the electricity, the electric company does not want us messing with the system now.
Yes.
We have to figure out a safe way to do it post disaster so that nobody gets electrocuted. So it's not near as simple as we would hope for.
Right.
Matt, go ahead. Quick one.
Yeah, well, that's something that we talked about a little bit, and that's kind of what it seems to come down to is that that's a change that you'd be best off making now. Switching the type of system that you have and investing in batteries, because not only is it going to be next to impossible to convert a strictly grid tie system to an off-grid system, but it's going to be impossible to find the kind of batteries that you would be able to charge with it anyway. So yeah, that's something that we can talk about as a network, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Carl, go ahead.
There's two broad approaches you can take to solar. One is if you have a system like Ann has, where you've got solar panels on the roof, but it ties to a grid tie and back feeds to the city light but doesn't have batteries. The other is a off-grid, if you will, system that provides you power with batteries. During the day, the solar charges the batteries. At night, you drain the batteries down, running electricity, running items. You don't have to have an all or nothing solution. There are a lot of smaller, lower power solar generator, I think is the term that's applied to them, that can run varying amounts of load in your home. I can run my CPAP machine for days on a 100 amp hour battery I've got, and I can recharge that with solar. I can run my radios for pretty much perpetually with the amount of battery and solar I have. And it's not a grid tie solar like on a house, it's just several portable solar panels and a quantity of rechargeable batteries. So there are solar options to look at short of the whole home solar, and that's the far extreme of taking, where you can take that discussion. and whatever works best for you. And I agree with Matt, now's the time to start. If you want to plan for that or get that, start now. Find the right answer, figure out which course you want to take, then engage the proper people that can, do it professionally and get you where you need to be.
Thanks, Carl. Dave and Jody, I see your hands up and I see Andy's too, but let me interject something really quick. One of the thoughts I've been having is having like a show and tell of solar panels and really, really honestly showing people what they can do and what they can't do. My opinion, and this is very, very uneducated, but I feel like people think solar is going to do quite a bit, and I don't know that that's actually true. So I'd like to see the numbers. So I'd like to do a show and tell of solar panels that folks have and what actually do they charge and how long does it take. The second thing I'd like to do, and maybe this summer, is get folks together and talk about how to cook for large amounts of people without electricity. What can you do on a barbecue grill? What can you do on a Coleman stove or whatever? So those two projects are kind of rattling around in my head, kind of show and tell projects. Dave, you had a question or a comment?
First of all, as a comment, I wrote the history of Seattle City Light, and the switch to this 28 kV system took place in the 1950s, and it was done at the expense of the ratepayers. So that was a big deal switching then. I was certainly unaware that it was now obsolete. But the comment that I also wanted to make was that the experiences in Puerto Rico are almost worthy of another presentation, because there are lots of anecdotes about, for example, generator operation. People had these camp generators, these little nice Honda generators, and they worked for about 3 days. There were people stealing generators. There were people stealing generators at gunpoint. Gasoline tankers were being hijacked until the point that they had to use the military police to escort gasoline tankers just to get fuel out into the neighborhoods. So there are lots of other implications that are probably useful in another whole additional system. But basically, what do you need in your house? Do you need just enough that a camp generator is going to cover it, or do you need something more than that?
Great, thank you, Dave. Jody, go ahead.
I think it would be good to include cooking using wood for fuel. But the other thing that I was thinking is, I think that it would be very good if we included in our discussions and preparations for disasters that people need to be aware of how little they can get along with, because there will be other people who need it more. So I think we, when the sun goes down, we go to bed, and when the sun comes up, we get up. But we should develop an awareness of not wasting resources because we have them, because there are going to be other people who don't have them and or who need more. So I can see some work being done on how could you get through a day using as little as possible. So you're down to what you absolutely have to have, instead of anyone trying to maintain a standard of living.
I hear you, Jody.
So I think
it's going to be a tough message, but I think we get it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to do that.
Yeah, and I think we will. It's a tough message to sell ahead of time. Okay, we're going to wrap up really quick here. Somebody else had their hand up. Who did I see? Oh, I see Hugh. Go ahead, Hugh, and then Andy.
Okay, this is just a quick comment. I guess I had a marketing idea here. And you mentioned how do you cook for a lot of people on a barbecue in an emergency, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we have these drills, or we hope people will wander by our parks and hub sites, and a few do, and they find out about hubs. Why don't we have a drill/barbecue?
Eat them.
And that would attract a few more people and do our presentation. Hook them in. So
I love that, Hugh.
Yeah.
Can I put you down for a pot of soup on your barbecue grill?
I can figure out something, yeah.
Yeah. Andy, you were next.
Yeah, very timely discussion with the solar panels and generators. I just engaged a contractor to install solar panels for us. It was a 6-month journey for me, learning about it and negotiating with these places. A super helpful organization is called EnergySage.com. They act as a broker. They're not a contractor. They're just tremendous source of information, and they've been very helpful. I narrowed it down to 2 companies, 2 contractors, and finally selected one based on the equipment they were using. So one really important thing, if you're planning to have a generator, which I am, these solar systems run on 240 volts. That's what the inverter puts out. So I have a 3,800 watt generator. I just love the thing. Problem was I didn't know when I bought it. It's 120 volt, doesn't have a 240 volt output. So if you're thinking of doing that and buying a generator, it must be a 240 volt generator. You probably want an inverter generator, which provides pretty much pure sine wave power, so you can run electronics with it. And anyway, it's there's a huge number of videos on YouTube that have been really helpful. So anyway, what I'd leave with you is EnergySage.com. They might even be able to do a presentation, a virtual one on selecting it, because it's been a really long journey for me to define what we wanted. As far as cost, solar panels, you're looking at around $25,000 to put, cover your roof with solar panels. And the batteries, the battery arrangement I specified is about another 25,000. So it's costing me around 48,000. And generator hookup and all that. Anyway, that's what I'll leave with you.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy. I love that resource. Cindy, you had a comment, question?
It's too late for this year, but we could talk to ACS and arrange for field day in 2024 to have a solar panel generation demonstration thing.
Show and tell.
Mhm.
Love it. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be
That's
bringing
a good idea.
money to field day. Or the
Okay.
Seattle Radio Field Day. Anyway.
Last couple of field days have been 100% off grid.
Sweet. Jody?
There is somewhere I've seen a book called Living Without Electricity. And I think one of the things we could incorporate in is how much can you do without electricity? Because we are not going to have enough to go around at times, it seems. So we need to expand our knowledge and experience and skills about doing without electricity, because there are some things it will be vital for, but there's a lot of other things we could substitute for so that we have it for what really counts.
Sure. Excellent. Hey, I did have 2 comments about information that's in our hub books, the education books for the hubs. One of them is siphoning. So there, I remember putting in 2 pictures of different methods of siphoning, like gas. And the other one, what's that?
From your neighbor?
From your, well, and oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. What was the other one? It had something to do with, oh, it's a bicycle generator, bicycle generating electricity. So we were thinking along these lines when we put the education books together. I don't know that anybody's ever going to ride a bicycle to create energy, but you never know. Okay, that's
what teenagers are for.
Yeah.
Boy Scouts, yeah.
But then you got to feed them.
Oh yeah.
All right. It's a little bit after 8. Any last minute?
Yeah, I have.
Oh, go ahead, Cindy. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Cindy has an announcement, as do I, and then we'll do one more last room around the room. Brittany, do you need to go?
No, I just didn't know if I was still taking questions. I just wanted to make sure I was still looped in.
Okay. I think Cindy, real quick before you go into the hats, does anybody have any more questions for Brittany, or can we let her go?
Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you very much, Brittany. Very informative. You're doing great things in your department.
Thank you. And if you all need me to get my counterparts to come to talk about those remaining questions, I'll do what I can to round them up, and we'll be back if you need.
All right. Thanks, Brittany. Good job.
Thank y'all. Thank you.
Okay, Cindy, you're on.
What I'd like to do tonight is take a quick poll. So get your little finger thumb up ready. And if you know where to find the thumb down, I'll take those too. We have a lot of new hub captains, and some people, go, where did you get those baseball hats? And Ron had these made for us ages ago, and we just hadn't had the energy to go try it again. So I went and got quotes, just to see what it was going to be. Sticker shock for Cindy, I'm used to $15 baseball hats, but because there's a lot of words on here, they're $35 a piece. So would anybody out there, and I'm going to put you all on my screen, give me a quick read if you would want a baseball hat for 30 something, 35.17. I'm only seeing a few. Okay, like maybe 4. Okay, I didn't want to waste hub captain's time if we didn't have, a really good response. So then the next one is the Madison Valley people. They got artists on their team, and they went and had these vests made. And so I went out and got quotes based on the pattern they use. So it's a black vest, it says Seattle Emergency Hubs. It was just too much to put communication hubs in there, so just went with the short version. And the price is, 66, oops, sorry about that, 66 up to 70 at the larger sizes. So, there wasn't a huge amount of discrepancy between the sizes. Is anybody interested in those at that price? Yeah, I kind of thought they were a little on the high side. So I might go back to Lids and get another estimate from them. They were who we originally had. I just went to my local guy just to see what would happen. So thank you for the Insta poll, and I will, you'll see something maybe in June.
I'm sure that we have silkscreen capacity somewhere, only a step or two away from us.
They're not silkscreen. They're actually.
I know, but that would be perhaps a cheaper way to get something that's identifiable. Just a thought.
Yeah, I remember Lids was around in the $20 range, so that's why I want to go back to them and do a quick quote from them. Okay, thank you.
Maybe do embroidery locally too. I'm just thinking, in terms of branding, something that would be cheaper and maybe more universal is if we did some stickers and Velcro patches. There's a lot of, you can buy hats with just plain Velcro patches on them, and a lot of emergency vests and jackets have Velcro patches. So if we just had something you could stick on, maybe that would be easier to
yeah. So if you talk to, there are places in Seattle that do embroidery.
Yep.
And that would also help, those of us who are 4'11" and weigh 100 pounds, and then,
extra small,
so that we can put it on a hat or a jacket or whatever.
How do you get the hat so it adheres to the hat? Do you have to buy a hat?
I'll sew them on myself by hand.
You can sew it on. Some hats have a Velcro patch.
Okay, that's so I can look for those. So, okay. All right,
yeah,
thank you guys.
I can send you links.
I mean, I'll sew on everybody's,
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you.
That's very nice of you.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, got a couple last minute things to share with you. First, we wrote a grant and got awarded that grant, so we got money. We are able to get all the hub captains a neighborhood level map, fairly large. You probably can't see me because I'm not fairly large. It's like most of them are 24 inches wide by like 34 inches tall. I'm going to show you a picture of mine. I got mine a while back. That's obviously not the whole map, but that's kind of the detailed level you get. So parks are on there, hospitals are on there, police departments, fire stations, that kind of, I think schools are on there. So that's on there automatically. And then this happens to be my neighborhood, and you're seeing address numbers, street numbers for all of these, for all the houses. And then obviously the streets are named as well. So very, very useful map for neighborhoods. So the deal is we will pay for the first one for all 71 hubcaps. And then if you want a second one and somebody in your hub is able to purchase it, the second one is $42. So I will be sending out a form. I need you to fill it out, who the point of contact is, And then what are your boundaries? And you have to think in rectangles. This is not an oval. This is not a triangle. You have to think in rectangles because that's how maps are done. So I will ask you for north, south, east, and west boundaries. And then you can communicate with the map guy and figure out how big, what are the boundaries you want for your particular neighborhood. They are laminated. They are not mounted. You're welcome to put them on a foam board or something like that if you want. But we wanted to leave them, so you could roll them up if necessary. Catherine, you have a question.
You might have just answered my question. I look at that map and I immediately think of like, can I stick pins, red pins for people who have immediate needs?
Dry erase markers, or you can put holes in it, sure.
Put a magnetic back on it so I could stick magnetized.
Sure. Yeah, whatever you want.
Something like that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Phil?
Hi, how do we know we're not running into somebody else's hub?
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
The general, and I'm sending out a link of how you can kind of see around your hub, what's a 15-minute walk? What does that look like? And that's what we believe the typical neighbor will walk to. If they have to walk further than 15 minutes, they're probably either not going to know about the hub or maybe won't be able to get there. So we're just kind of guessing. If you overlap, and I'd be surprised if many of us overlap because we have deserts of hubs. But anyway, if you overlap, it's not a big deal.
All right,
You just may never use that section. So any more questions about the map? Yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
The thing that I would do is if my neighborhood was 15 minutes, but by extending it 3 blocks, I would be able to see the West Seattle Bridge, for example. I might include that in my neighborhood so I can go, nope, not working today. So, so there's flexibility.
Yeah. Think about like natural barriers. Like it may be a 15-minute walk, but if it's a huge ravine and you don't think people are going to be able to traverse it, maybe that's one of your edges, as long as it's 90 degrees in one direction or another. So any more questions about the map stuff? We don't really have a deadline on this, but I'd like to get it done by the end of summer. And I really want to concentrate on the 11 hubs that are activating June 11th. So I'm going to be pinging those guys hard. I will reach out to everybody else, but I'm not going to chase you down. If you don't fill out the form, you don't get a map. What else? So any more questions about hub maps and our grant? And we asked for $5,000. It took that much. Okay, last thing I have, I promise, is just want to show you the flyer that's coming out any minute now. This is the flyer for the June 11th drill. So Power Down was the name we chose. Here's a blurb about what a drill is and what to expect. Sunday, June 11th, 1:30 to 4. Here's the 11 hubs that are participating, their addresses. This QR code down here leads to a sign up. On the sign up, there are 30 spots. This is for neighbors. This is for looky-loos, for folks just to come and watch. Obviously, we're going to get them involved, but we're not making them choose a role at the moment. So we're hoping, the idea being is if people actually sign up, they will get a notification that there's 3 days out that they signed up for the drill, and hopefully they'll show up. So we do have a place for folks to sign up if they want to. Obviously, they don't have to. And then eventually the front page, and this will hopefully happen tonight, the front page of the Emergency Communication Hub website will have all this information too. And then also the hub captains that are activating June 11th have asked for a sign up to start putting names under roles. So there's roles that they want filled. They don't want to pull somebody from the audience and train them on the spot to be the information officer or the education officer. They would like folks to sign up for that. They're going to work to get their community members involved first and then ask the hub captains to backfill any of the spots they have open. So just keep an eye out.
What happens if more than 30 people sign up? Do you say it's full?
Oh, no. I will watch it and I will bump it up to 50 or 180, whatever it takes.